Europe wants to be sure nobody holds a kill switch over its critical services. And these are not my words. It's Henna Virkkunen's, a vice president for the European Commission. And that's why they said when talking about the US cloud providers back in June. But they weren't talking about hackers or bad actors. They meant Microsoft, Amazon, Google. And what happens to government data if a foreign vendor's home country ever decides a European institution is a problem worth leaning on? Most countries spend a long time talking about this. France did something about it. This year, the French government told 200,000 civil servants to stop using Microsoft Teams and Zoom on a fixed deadline and switch to a domestic alternative, Teams and Zoom. Love them or hate them, these are two of the most widely used pieces of software on the planet. Phase out of an entire nation government on purpose. Video calls were just the beginning. France is also rebuilding its messaging, its file storage, its operating systems, and of course, its email. If a government can walk away from Zoom and Teams, how long before it walks away from Gmail or Outlook? And all of the US software is being relying on for years. My name is Marcos Bravo, and this is Subject Line Blank. Visio, France's Zoom alternative, sits inside something called LaSuite. And LaSuite is basically France trying to build its own all-in-one work toolbox for civil servants. Video calls, file transfer, documents, messaging, email, identity, even some AI tools. The normal stuff people use every day to get work done. All of that have a US alternative that was, until not too long ago, the norm. But this is not France saying, we want our own Zoom. No, that will be silly. Sorry about my accent. It is more like France looking at the daily software layer of government and saying, okay, how much of this can we actually run ourselves? How much of our government communications can we keep under French and EU law instead of a foreign vendor's terms of service? LaSuite say it is already used every month by more than 500,000 state agents across 15 different ministries and other public administrations. Its messaging tool, Chat, is already used by around 600,000 agents. And this is not about building the coolest app in Europe. France is trying to build enough of the boring stack that public workers can do normal public work without every layer depending on US software. This spring, France went a layer deeper and ordered every ministry to come up with a plan for moving desktop computers off Windows and onto Linux. Each ministry gets to pick its own path, which tells you this is just the opening phase of a much longer campaign. But the France replaces Zoom headline is not about video conference software. Visio also includes AI features like meeting transcriptions and real-time subtitles that are coming later this year, but still, these features are being built by companies like Pianot and Qtai, both French. Teams and Zoom already sell AI transcription, and live captioning is part of it. It's a premium feature, but still. These are built on Microsoft's and Google-owned models or licensed from OpenAI. Replacing the meeting app also means replacing the AI sitting inside it. And France is doing that with homegrown labs instead of a Copilot or a Gemini integration bolted on a French front end. Visio isn't the only place this is showing up. Alongside it, the French government has been rolling out Mistral's Le Chat assistant across the civil service. Let's put the pieces together, and this looks less like a meeting app story and more like France and Europe testing whether its own AI companies can sit inside daily government tools. It's an implicit bet that companies like Mistral, Qtai, and Pianot can hold their own against OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft inside the exact productivity tools a government is adopting for legal reasons. And though Mistral does have some traction, it's still tiny next to the US competition. Can Europe build a sovereign AI stack embedded in everyday productivity tools fast enough to catch up with the US AI race before good enough sovereignty loses to just use the Microsoft one? It's better, or it's been around for a while. Now, I don't think Europe is having a romantic freedom moment here. I think it wants options. It wants to be able to say no, especially to a foreign government or a geopolitical mess, without discovering that half the public sector still needs the same handful of platforms to do their work. The European Commission has put a number on the problem. It says the EU depends on non-European countries for more than 80% of key digital products, services, infrastructure, and intellectual property. 80%. Europe can regulate tech companies all day. It does. But if the tools, clouds, office suites, AI, and intellectual property, if they're all ruled somewhere else, Europe is still negotiating from a weird place. This is why the Commission proposed a tech sovereignty package in June 2026, with proposals around chips, cloud, AI, and open source. But it's still a proposal. It needs sign-off from every member state. You know how it is. And, of course, the European Parliament. And the current draft only gives EU origin providers a modest edge in scoring any sort of business. So the conversation is shifting from Brussels paperwork to national government taking the action. France is building LaSuite. Germany has Schleswig-Holstein moving public administration to open source. Denmark's Ministry for Digital Affairs has been moving away from Microsoft Office 365 toward LibreOffice. The details are different, but the direction is similar. Fewer public systems lock into a small group of foreign suppliers. The cloud part maybe is even more direct. Reuters report that EU regulators said Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure should be treated as gatekeepers under the Digital Markets Act. And this is not because they're big or huge. The Commission pointed to the role in Europe's digital economy, AI, high switching costs, and locking effects. That is Europe's straightforward saying that cloud is not someone else's server bill anymore. It is part of the bargaining table. That is also why the open source detail keeps showing up. Open source does not magically solve everything. Anyone who's used bad software knows having a license does not make a tool good. But open standards, export formats, and public code make it harder for one vendor to become the only reasonable path. That is the part Europe seems to be trying to fix. Not every tool needs to be European forever, but public institutions want to avoid waking up one day and realizing they only have one door out, and if it's locked from the other side, sorry. And now to my favorite angle, email. Email is already there. LaSuite includes professional email. France's wider software stack includes messaging, identity, files, and documents, as I mentioned before. Denmark's own issues include the fear of suddenly not being able to send emails or communicate internally during a political conflict. And in Germany, Schleswig-Holstein already did the painful version. It moved its state administration mail system away from Microsoft Exchange and Outlook. The Schleswig-Holstein number is crazy. More than 44,000 mailboxes and 110 million emails and calendar entries moved to Open Exchange and Thunderbird. That is years of daily work, decisions, appointments, attachments, records, memory, and moving it somewhere else away from you know who. Here's where it gets bigger than governments. If sovereignty logic keeps expanding, if it moves from client-facing tools like Teams and Zoom into back-end email infrastructure, that's not a government story anymore. That's a story for every company building on transactional or marketing emails. Deliverability providers, ESPs, SMTP relays, anyone whose entire business depends on email arriving in the inbox. Is that you? France already has a name for this in cloud infrastructure. Secnum Cloud certification is now a real requirement in government hosting decisions, and Visio is built on it. So does sovereign SMTP become the next item in EU government's list of regulations, the same way sovereign cloud already did? And this is where the email part gets a little messy. Even if France or the entire EU builds a fully sovereign email system, that system still has to talk to Gmail or to Outlook, to every inbox on the planet, which means SPF, DKIM, DMARC, all those need to be aligned. During the Schleswig-Holstein transition, some emails were reportedly routed to the wrong inboxes. It affected staff losing access to their mail, and at least one court warned that email reachability could be unreliable for several days. Which is exactly the point. Email migration is not a clean copy-paste job. When it has a problem, people do not experience it as digital sovereignty problems. They experience it as, why am I not getting my emails? Sovereignty doesn't exempt you from deliverability physics. You can own every server in the chain and still land in someone's junk folder. Europe is late, but it's not wrong. It spent years regulating a world that it really depends on. But sovereignty was never really about software. It's about what happened the day Europe needs to say no and discovered it can't. That is not really in their power. The legal right is one thing. The exit strategy is another. That's the actual bet being placed right now in France, in Denmark, in Germany, all around Europe. Not let's build better tools. It's let's build the ability to leave. Let's build the ability to say no. The thing with exit doors is that nobody notices them until the building is on fire. So here's what I'm actually watching for. Not whether Visio is as good as Zoom or LaSuite is as polished as Microsoft 365. I'm watching for the first real crisis, a provider pulling out of a market overnight, and whether Europe's sovereign stack is ready when that happens, or if maybe it's still just a PowerPoint from 2026. Because that's the only test that actually matters. Everything else is a rehearsal. My name is Marcos Bravo, and this is Subject Line Blank.